Good morning. Good morning and welcome back here at Berkeley Klubas. I'm really pleased to see a lot of faces, a lot of familiar faces as well from yesterday, the first day of the conference. So we'll continue today for the second day. And as I mentioned yesterday, we'll have a lot of discussions and presentations about mental health, about how mental health is connected with migration, other issues as well. We also will be talking about cooperation and working together. I just want to remind you that this conference was made by these four amazing organizations together. So it's Diversity Development Group, it's also United Nations Refugee Agency, also Nordic Council of Ministers, and the Lithuanian Ministry of Social Security and Labor. And we will have not only just discussions, presentations, keynote speech, but we also have some breaks, which I always recommend to use for contact making or just to knowing each other better, because as you heard, well, it's about cooperation and working together. So why not work together during the break as well? But that's all from me at the moment, and we will have a wonderful speech from our keynote speech. It's Professor Greta Brockman. She's a professor of sociology, Department of Sociology and Human Geography at the University of Oslo. She has published several books and articles on international migration, sending and receiving country perspectives, EU policies, welfare state dilemmas, as well as historical studies on immigration. She has served as a visiting scholar in Brussels, Berkeley, and Boston. So I'm really pleased to see you here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. First of all, many thanks for the invitation to this highly interesting and very pleasant conference. I've had such a good time so far. The focus of this conference, civil society and the municipal level, is in many ways the level when we're talking about day-to-day integration processes. And this level has also gained importance tremendously over the years. But I have nevertheless been asked to talk from a sort of a broader point, and I've been given the terms language and politics, discourse, power, and migration, which is in many ways a tall order. So what I will do is to concentrate on language as a part of a wider policy approach, or the long lines in integration policies. The significance of language in changing integration regimes, so to speak. So my talk will be both macro and micro, high level, low level. And I will use Scandinavia, the three Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, as my political context. And this is an interesting region because there are so many similarities between these three countries, but there are also significant differences, and these differences are also changing over time. There we go. Very basically, language is both a symbol and an instrument, and the complexity of the language as a theme is important. Language is basically part of a nation-state raison. Language is typically, not always, but typically seen as central to binding the state and the cultural history together. And this connection is also reproduced by the citizens on a daily basis. Language is believed to contribute to the trust reservoir in society and to social cohesion, the forces that bind society together over time. And it's also one of the most important integration mechanisms in society. Yet language also represents social boundaries between human collectives. It both serves as sort of a bonding mechanism internally within groups and as a demarcation mechanism towards the outer world. It's exclusion and inclusion in one. And language is both a tool and an identity in many ways. And language is central to citizenship, being part of a nation-state context. And to agency, very basically, to have command over daily life in a social context. In many ways, the language is the common denominator in a society. It binds people together by means of conceptualization, and it serves to constitute a shared referential resource and a shared basis for discourse, not least important. All these factors together are important. And I believe that the recently ended pandemic really gave all of us a wake-up call. The crisis made it essential to communicate. It was critical to reach out to the whole population with crucial information about preparedness, hygienic rules, advice in case of infection, etc., etc. And it revealed pockets in society out of reach for the authorities, basically for language reasons. And it triggered a whole new approach to health governance. Language instruction has now become part of the whole emergency preparedness thinking and policy in the Norwegian context. And I am sure this is also the case many other places. So for society at large, language has gained traction. But language is also emotional. We all know that. It basically carries existential meaning to individuals, and it's central very basically to perception. And besides, it's difficult to learn a new language. It's a long and often very frustrating process, and people also have very different personal preconditions for this endeavor. And I have always thought of it as a fascinating contrast between the magic of learning a language just by growing up and the struggle we all have to experience when learning a new language later in life. But besides all these more sociological features, the question of exile and language has engendered wonderful pieces of literature. Like, for example, Agatha Christoph's novel, The Illiterate. Many of you might have known this or read this novel. In this book, she describes refugee exile as basically deprivation of everything she loved, language, context and meaning. She lacks tools to tacit knowledge, access to everything that was there beforehand. Yet, she develops her authorship in the exile language, which she calls the enemy language, as a survival strategy, and she does that with great success. So it's a paradoxical and moving novel with language center stage. So, altogether, language is not a trivial nor an innocent thing. The language issue can be politicized within a nation, which many of us have experienced. Language policy within the state is often very contagious issues. And with immigration, language issues comes along in complex, demanding, and also seen from the state's point of view, very expensive ways. How to accommodate translation within the health sector, for example, with 150 different languages, when immigrants have the right to simultaneous translation. This has been a significant issue in the Scandinavian country over the years. I'll come back to language as a policy issue, but first a quick historical detour. to contextualize the development of the language issue in terms of integration within a Nordic model approach. What is internationally called the Nordic model is basically a welfare state labor market dynamic model. And this model, which was actually finalized sort of institutionally at the end of the 60s, it became extremely important for the kind of immigration policy that was possible to establish in this universalistic model context. So it made the states go for a dualistic approach, a tough front and a softer inside, a strict access control, at least intentionally, and an inclusive internal policy. And this was seen as a systemic necessity in Scandinavia. Efforts to integrate immigrants into working and social life became a consequence of the welfare state model in many ways. Welfare states, such as the Scandinavian ones, are basically vulnerable to marginalization, and that is to say they cannot, in the long run, tolerate significant elements of groups that are outside of the regulated working life and that potentially burden social budgets. The inclusion of immigrants has in many ways been handled as part of the welfare state's general integration project, the goal of including different population groups into a national community through generous and redistributive welfare schemes. Allocation of rights has been a mainstay of integration thinking from the very beginning, the belief that equal rights promote inclusion. The welfare model's heavy weights, such as work, education, health, and income security, were the themes that for long dominated integration thinking in the region. And there are very good reasons for that. The welfare model is built on the interaction between employment and welfare and depends on a high employment rate. Labor market conditions are reflected in the welfare state. The groups that have problems on the labor market become client groups in the social services, the labor market agency, and the social security system. The welfare policy emphasis on social investment through basic education and qualification has supported this so-called work line approach. And a high-quality healthcare system with equal treatment as well as income protection for all legal newcomers is also considered part of this social investment. This triangle illustrates the basic dynamic of the Nordic model approach to immigrant inclusion. These main institutional areas were seen as most important for an equal treatment and rights-based policy towards newcomers. And the figure also illustrates the mainstreaming of integration thinking in Scandinavia, the hardcore institutional inclusion policy. But integration also involves cultural aspects, social aspects, civil society aspects. But how are these matters dealt with over the years? According to a multicultural ideology which dominated from the beginning back in the 70s, free choice as to cultural adaptation was a core theme. And Sweden was the pioneer country, both in policymaking and in ideology production, in the early phase of the so-called new immigration that started in the late 60s. Sweden had already had extensive labor immigration for quite some years, since the 50s, so they had the experience and they had the thinking when this phenomenon came to the whole of the region. So both Denmark and Norway imported this basic thinking from Sweden in the beginning, by and large. So free choice in terms of cultural adaptation is a key word. Despite similarities in terms of the basic Nordic model feature, there are significant differences, as I mentioned initially. And of course, I do not have time to go in detail, but the quintessence here is that Denmark has actually, from an early stage, deviated somewhat from Sweden and Norway, being a more national, nation-state-oriented ideology producer and policymaker. Whereas Norway has been the most serving country in terms of importing the thinking from Sweden. That lasted for many years. And when I've been doing historical studies, it has been fascinating to discover how, I mean, it's a copycat policy that has been taking place in Norway to a large extent, and actually up till the 90s. So the formulations, the thinking, everything was formulated in Sweden, and it was directly adopted more or less in the Norwegian context. Denmark was more stubborn. Within this multicultural thinking from the beginning, human rights was central, is still central, and language as a part of this was not considered extremely important. I mean, this free choice also applied to the languages issue to a large extent. So facilitation through interpreters was seen as essential, besides courses for those who wanted it. And mother tongue issues was very central for the same reasons. For ideological reasons in the first place, but increasingly also for instrumental reasons. But it has been controversial as an issue all the way through. The basic question was, is it useful or harmful to newcomers in a host country to concentrate on mother tongue? And the experts have not agreed. And thus, the question of whom should have also the financial responsibility for the upkeep of the mother tongue has been an issue over the years. So this field, the mother tongue field, has developed from a multicultural approach, free choice as to the new language acquisition for adults, and support for mother tongue instruction for school kids. This was the first phase, and then later on to a more technical, pedagogical issue, the instrumentalism in learning a new language. So mother tongue instruction was increasingly seen as a means to learn the host country language. The scientific discussion was influenced by political disagreement. What should integration actually imply? That means the disagreement as to the meaning of very basic mechanisms was important. The right to be equal or the right to be different, to put it simple. So let's quickly look at the three countries historically here. Denmark and Sweden both introduced mother tongue instructions in 1976. In which they granted pupils the right to education in their home language a few hours a week. What motivated both states initially was the instrumental side, the value of first language for learning a second language and for the development of the child's self-identity. And besides, in Denmark, they also had this idea that keeping up mother tongue would make it easier for a return later on. In the late 1980s, things were changing, and Denmark from that point argued that there is no evidence of this instrumental thinking. The conservatives asserted that mother tongue is a private issue. Social Democrats would keep it, but the party was not certain as to the effect, nevertheless. It was interesting that the question of scientific evidence basically followed ideological lines. Denmark has had a rather consistent monocultural approach, whereas Sweden has stood for diversification and liberalization. And it reflects basically two different views on the best preconditions for inclusion. Denmark emphasized the need to define a single national core culture to which newcomers would have to adapt. Assimilation as a precondition for equal inclusion. In Sweden, the idea has been multiple cultures have to adapt to one another, and with a claim on especially the majority to recognize the other. And the welfare state has been a central entity in the whole thinking. In Norway, since the 1990s, there has been more concern about language issues in the school system, and the basic public documents today communicate that language should be seen not only as education, but also as formation, Bildung, socialization, and the development of cultural consciousness and identification. So the teaching of Norwegian is supposed to give insight in society in general, enhance knowledge and understanding of the culture and the dominating values. So Norway has been moving also in this respect. But basically, by and large, it's right to say that mother tongue has been devalued as a public responsibility over the years. Then, there was a rather major change in the whole thinking and the whole approach roughly around the turn of the century. And this is what in academic circles has got the term the civic turn, from rights to duties. There was a change of tide, and particularly in Denmark, it started more or less in Denmark, in our region. And the idea was that integration was not functioning well enough. Too few were working, too many were dependent on welfare transfers. There were cultural conflicts getting into focus in which women's role in society was at the center. And in public discourses and also academic discourses, there was a intensified concern with producing and reproducing the national citizenry. The questions were what kind of virtues were required to sustain a well-functioning liberal democracy and a social welfare state. And this turn very basically includes both a stricter requirement for entry and softer forms of value and knowledge transmittance to pupils in school. And there are two central keywords here: participation and responsibility. Participation meaning participating in elections, in communities, in schools, supporting kids in schools, etc., neighborhoods, many aspects of this participation issue. And responsibility, basically the responsibility of the individual in the integration process. And as I said, this market change was most forceful in Denmark, and a turning point was the Fogh Rasmussen government in 2001. And this government sort of turned the whole area upside down by introducing restrictions all the way down. I mean, on entry policies and on integration policies. And most significantly in our context is that they introduced a two-track system in the welfare provisions, which was a sort of a unthinkable thing in the Scandinavian region only a few years before, because of this universalistic welfare model thinking that has been core over the years since the late 60s. But this was changed also in Denmark. But on the more positive side, all three countries introduced this introductory program that we were told about yesterday. And in this introductory system, the language question was absolutely central. And on top of the language issue, we had labor market preparations of various strands, but language, extremely central and important, and seeing language as a tool of absolutely necessary empowerment. Mother tongue was still inconclusive in this setting. It was privatized after the turn of the century, first and foremost in Denmark and Norway. But also gradually, on the positive side, in the Norwegian context, a new concept was introduced by the conservative government a few years ago, which is called hverdagsintegrering, which means daily life integration, civil society integration, if you like. And another very, very central concepts over the last years is outsidership and segregation, which is connected. And as we all know, I guess, this has more or less exploded in a huge debate in the wake of the uproars in the gang criminality on the Swedish side. Norwegian public is extremely concentrated on this issue, the gang criminality in Sweden, and also seeing tendencies going in the same direction in certain areas, not to the same extent, but nevertheless, particularly in Oslo. But individually, this civic turn also has to do with the individual immigrant, the feeling of belonging, questions of discrimination, questions of personal autonomy, etc. It's a highly complex field, this whole civic discussion. Social cohesion, extremely important. And social cohesion is also a very controversial term. I mean, what does it actually mean? And whose cohesion is often addressed as a central question here. Is it the traditional majority society's cohesion, or is it the totality of society's cohesion? Very important discussion. But very basically, what does it take to reproduce a well-functioning liberal democratic society and a generous and equal treating welfare state? Very basic to the countries like the Scandinavian ones. But how to deal with this politically? I mean, this is not a straightforward question. And politicians have great problems dealing with these issues because it's difficult to operationalize. And so far, I mean, there are just very patchy attempts to do any policy making in this field whatsoever. But Denmark and Norway have tried to use the naturalization policies as a means in this context. And particularly in Denmark, again, restrictions in terms of access to the naturalization procedure has been important. So Denmark today is one of Europe's most restrictive countries in terms of naturalization policies. Norway used to be much closer to Sweden, which is in the other end of the scale, being one of the most liberal naturalization countries in Europe. Denmark has continuously made it more and more restrictive, more and more demanding in terms of language knowledge, knowledge about society, history, etc., etc. And Norway has slowly followed Denmark more than Sweden. What is interesting is that the civic turn issue has not been that relevant in the Swedish context as it has been in the Danish and the Norwegian one. And as to the naturalization policies, Sweden has hardly touched it. It's not seen as a tool in this social cohesion process. If it is a tool, it is a process tool. I mean, being Swedish citizen is part of the process of being integrated. Whereas in Denmark, it's explicitly said from political side that this is a gift from the Danish nation to newcomers, if they deserve it. And they really have to deserve it. So the language demands are quite strict today, and Norway is following suit. Well, I should possibly conclude, I think. Language acquisition has both a macro and a micro element. I've been through a number of these issues, but this is just kind of summing up. Strategic preparedness has come as a new issue after the pandemic on this list. And finally, on the micro level, it's not possible to get around the language acquisition issue if one wants to establish oneself in a new nation-state context. It has to do with empowerment, as I've talked about, security, autonomy, possibilities of relating to neighbors, etc., etc. It is important, but how to get there is the big question, and this is definitely work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have time for one or two questions. So is there any questions here in the audience? Okay, so then let's continue with my question, which I have. Because I was listening to your presentation, and in Lithuania currently we also have discussion about language, and should it be well, forcibly, basically, asked for people who want to be in Lithuanian labor markets, especially those people who are working, I don't know, as a cab drivers, and they're using, for example, navigation, and they can navigate without a language. But some people feel kind of insulted, some Lithuanians, that they cannot speak in Lithuanian with the driver. And there's a lot of political initiatives at the parliament where we should have a law which would well, enforce everyone to speak Lithuanian if they want to be in the market. So how do you think that would make those newcomers feel when you are forced to learn the language without any explanation why the language is useful in the other areas?
No, this really points to what I said about language being an emotional issue. And we all know about this. I mean, it can be frustrating for maybe particularly old people, also in the highly educated Scandinavian area, where they cannot use their native language in shops and in restaurants, etc. And quite a number of those old people don't know English very well. So this is a real problem. And on the other side, of course, it's essential for the state to be able to include people in the labor market as soon as possible, even if people are not fluent in the host country language. And I mean, it's even in the academic circles, this is now in Norway at least, it has turned into a very, very emotional issue too. I mean, is English going to take over completely? What about being able to communicate in a scientific context with your own language? I mean, we need to teach students the various disciplinary fields in our own language also, because they are supposed to get into jobs in the state administration, in the municipalities, etc., etc. They need to know the terms in their own language. And and at the same time, internationalization means that English is taking over. Period. It is, and it's very, very controversial and emotional, even at that level in a highly educated society. So, I mean, maybe to end on that, it's emotional, really, on top of all the other practical and instrumental aspects of it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one question there in the back.
Hello, I'm Matis from the Nordic Council of Ministers Office, Estonia, and I just wanted to thank you for this very good presentation. And I would like to ask, in this Nordic context, although Finland and Iceland are kind of out of the scope of your presentation, but could you still give us a kind of indication where do Finland and Iceland stand on this scale from Sweden to Denmark? Do they have similarities to the Danish or Swedish model? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I get that quite frequently when speaking in a Nordic context for obvious reasons. But my research history is the Scandinavian region, but I've also worked on Finland and Iceland occasionally. And the reason why I originally chose the three Scandinavian countries is because the patterns are very similar in terms of the historical take in these matters, and also Finland and Iceland did not have very much immigration at all until quite recently. Iceland had labor immigration, but not a welfare state to the same extent and in the same manner as the Scandinavian countries, so the whole plot was very different. And Finland is now gaining ground more and more and resembles the rest of Scandinavia in many ways. And as far as I have gathered, you may be more expert on this than what I am, I feel that it seems that Finland is taking up the Swedish line to a large extent. And this is particularly interesting today because Sweden has, I didn't have time to talk about that, but Sweden has made a U-turn. I mean, I started out as labeling Sweden as the most generous, the most open, the most multicultural, etc., etc. And now this is not the case anymore. And the Ukrainian, I didn't have time to go into that either, the Ukrainian issue is illustrative on that. Sweden is now the most stingy of the three countries in the Scandinavian context, whereas Norway has gained ground and is today, at least as of now, offering the definitely most generous welfare transfers, the most generous conditions, etc., etc. So I mean, the roles are changing. So it's not anymore the same way, but as far as I know, Finland has, up to this point, at least up to the refugee crisis in 2015, resembled Sweden more than Denmark, so to speak. You can correct me.
Thank you very much, Professor Greta Brekman from University of Oslo, from Norway. So thank you for your time, and we will continue. Yeah, to close. We will continue with our discussion now, and it will be more about cooperation, inclusion, and sustainability at national, local, and grassroots levels. And I would like to invite here on stage moderator. You already know him perfectly from yesterday. It's Karolis Žibas, Integration Officer at United Nations Agency, Refugee Agency, and focusing in Nordic and Baltic countries.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Once again, warm welcome. I think today we have one of my favorite topics, and the topic is more about how we create the dialogue between the refugee and migrant communities and the policy level, or politicians, or policy design. Also, at the same time, how we are making sure that the refugee and migrant voice is being heard while co-designing and co-implementing integration services. So I'm very happy to invite our 5 panelists. I will start with Mr. Peter. Peter, welcome. Peter is Secretary General of ETNO at the Ministry of Justice in Finland. So warm welcome. Peter will talk about this really excellent platform, which is called ETNO at national and regional levels. Also, I'm very happy to see another Finnish person here. I would like to introduce you with Suvi, Head of Migrant Integration Services at the city of Vantaa. I think city of Vantaa hosts the record number of the study visits across the Nordic countries, so congratulations for that. And the next panelist is Miles from Question Media Sweden, also refugee-led organizations. Miles. And the next speaker is Akhtar from our Lithuanian refugee organization. So Akhtar represents the Refugee Council of Lithuania. And of course, Eugenia, CEO at Ukraine Hub, as well from Lithuania. So thank you very much. As yesterday, we will have a short presentations of all different 5 concepts, starting from the national and regional level of the Ministry of Justice. Then we will dive into the local level, and then we will have a couple of examples from the grassroots level. And all those examples are more about the representing migrants, refugees, and building the dialogue between different refugee and migrant groups. And I think this is really fascinating. So, Peter, over to you, just to really briefly present the concept behind the ETNO.
Thank you very much, Karolis. I think the microphone is working. Yes, good, fantastic. Yes, I will need that. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this wonderful conference, and it's great to be here. Good reason to be in Vilnius again after a long break, almost 10 years. And the discussions, the presentations have been absolutely excellent. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to all the partnerships that have made this possible. I have very limited time, so let me get to my presentation. As you heard, I come from the Ministry of Justice, where I work, among other things, as the Secretary General for the Advisory Board for Ethnic Relations, ETNO. And basically, as it says there, it is a formal initiative by the government to build a platform for cooperation and dialogue. So I know many of the Baltic states are in a very interesting phase of accepting new and immense numbers of newcomers. Instead of waiting for decades, like many of the Scandinavian Nordic countries did, to build some of these platforms, I think it would be very good to initiate these kinds of formal government-initiated platforms at a very early stage that can create engagement, partnership, dialogue with the communities that are coming into our countries. So basically, ETNO has got a very long history, but the foundation is enshrined in the values and the cause of Finland, and basically, I suspect, in each and every country. We all strive to protect fundamental rights of each and every individual within our borders. We work on the principles of rule of law. We uphold principles of democracy and participation. And above all, we also enhance equality, be it gender, be it other forms of equality in our societies. I don't think anybody can disagree with this, be it in Lithuania, be it in Estonia, be it in Sweden, Norway, or Denmark. These are the core principles that we try to enhance in whatever that we do. So if this is the foundation of what we are doing, what kind of structures do we have in public administration that allow us to enhance this, not in paper, not in saying, but in practice? So Finland has got a very long history of advisory boards, or expert bodies that advise the government, consult with the government on different issues. So ETNO has got a very long history. I won't go through that whole history, but the initial advisory board that is the foundation of ETNO was formed in 1970. And at that time, it was actually concerned with outward migration. Too many people were moving to Sweden to work. So there was a big concern. But now the focus is on inward migration, integration, good relations in society. So the government has changed the format of this consultative body over the years. And at the moment, there are roughly 300 different experts working in the National Advisory Board, and in the regional advisory boards that are coordinated in the regional administrative centers. Now, the National Advisory Board is comprised of the ministries, it's comprised of trade union partners, it's comprised of the Association of Municipalities, there are the political parties in parliament, there are civil society organizations, and in addition to that, the regional advisory boards are represented and a few experts that are selected by the ministry comprise of the National Advisory Board. In the regions, the advisory boards are comprised of 14 members, and there are regional state officials, municipality officials on one side, half of the membership, and the other half is comprised of civil society organizations, members of different ethnic and language communities. So it is a 50-50 system. My time is running out, so I have to be quick. So what are the functions of this advisory board? These functions, in order to make them formal, they have been written in a government decree that the government will establish the advisory board every 4 years. It will have the composition that I just mentioned a few moments ago. The chairperson of this advisory board, the national one, will be the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice, regardless of who it is. So it's not a choice anymore. The government has the obligation, according to the decree, to establish this advisory board every 4 years. The tasks are very simple: advance dialogue and cooperation, assess the state of good relations in society, provide expert advice on different policy areas, participate in research and developmental projects, and work as a communication or information channel on different policy issues. Very simple tasks. What you do with these tasks is up to the ministry and the money it provides for that, but the tasks are also declared in the government decree. Then we come to the end where I mentioned monitor the task or the state of good relations in society. What we mean by good relations is, in other words, when it comes to integration, I'm sure most of you have heard of two-way integration, holistic integration, top-down, bottom-up integration. Good relations is a concept that we developed with my colleagues for a period of over 10 years. The initial ideas were produced in the United Kingdom, and we've used them over the last 10 years to see how we can fit this good relations idea into the Finnish context. So instead of just looking at integration from a lingual or an employment perspective, we can look at integration from a more holistic perspective. And there are four main domains: attitudes towards others in society, participation in society, interaction with others in society, and a sense of security in society. How do all these domains look when we are looking at the complete or holistic integration of people in society? We've finally managed to get this into the new Integration Act in Finland that is coming into force on the 1st of January 2025, which is a huge achievement for us, and we hope that this is going to be a new paradigm of looking at holistic integration in the future. And with 5 seconds left, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. This is a really excellent initiative, and when I have been observing this ethno advisory boards at the regional level and actually meeting with all associations, you really feel the whole sense and the logic of the good population relation policy and the whole concept. But now over to you, Suvi. Vantaa has always been strong in engaging the refugee population and migrant population in the co-design of services, so perhaps you could also brief us about your activities and your frameworks.
Yes, thank you, Karolis. I'm from Vantaa municipality, and as head of migration and integration services, I deal with both the employment of migrants, but also the more holistic approach, as my colleague said. And I want to give you a few examples on how we deal with these issues in Vantaa and ensure the dialogue with our migrant communities. So a few more strategic things to start with. We are the fourth largest city in Finland, but we are the most international. 25% of our residents are foreign language speakers, and that means around 60,000 people. So it's quite a lot for even a large city in Finland. And also the city mainly grows through migration. So this is a very strategic point for us. As my colleague mentioned, the Integration Act reform is coming next year, and that will mean a larger responsibility also for the municipalities concerning all migrant and integration services. And the idea is to strengthen the integration and employment of migrants, whether they are in or outside the labor force. Also, we will have a municipal integration program, which will ensure that we know exactly who is doing what step in the integration process. And we want to promote the inclusion, equality, well-being, and good ethnic relations. Also, we have our own advisory board, which has our local politicians and NGOs and some expert members. We have quite a few challenges, obviously, as every city does, but one of them being the areal segregation of Vantaa districts. And we have a few larger districts that have higher unemployment rates among migrant background population, as well as lower school performance among migrant background children. And these are very difficult issues, but we have managed to work with the communities and schools and NGOs to tackle these issues together. Since I'm on very limited time, I will go pretty quickly through these, but you will get the slides, I hope. So the initiative I'm presenting to you today is the SMILE project. It comes from the words strengthening migrant family integration through new dialogue methods with communities, schools, and services in Vantaa neighborhoods. So you can see why we're stuck with SMILE. It's quite a long explanation, but the core of it are three different working packages and approaches. Basically, we put migrant families in Vantaa in focus and wanted to look at this issue from three different perspectives. So in working package number 1, we have coaching for employment and integration. We have 5 NGOs, local NGOs, most of whom are also migrant-led, who offer local culture and language sensitive job counseling. And this is done in partnership with our local employment services. And then we have working package number 2, which is families and communities supporting children's school success. And we have employed community partnership workers who work in school areas. And basically they act together with schools, parents, NGOs, communities, and the local services in that school area. And the newest one is working package number 3, new local dialogues, which is well, the idea is to co-create local solutions to local problems with local communities. And related to this working package number 3, we have this thing called roundtable discussions. And this is not really a new thing in Vantaa. It actually emerged during the COVID outbreak when we had to inform the foreign language speakers better about everything that was going on, and we noticed that our message wasn't really getting through. So we contacted the NGOs and started to develop our communication methods. But the desire for these dialogues and roundtable discussions really came from the communities themselves, including NGOs and faith-based communities. So the idea was to discuss about issues that actually are very important for the communities, for example, youth, discrimination, all kinds of things related to well-being of the communities. And the idea is that the city also recognizes that these are the issues that are important for the local communities, and we need to tackle them together. So we want to maintain active and very low threshold links between these communities and the city services, and building trust is definitely key in this, because we want the communities to trust us and we need to trust the communities to do their thing. And we have already identified a few issues that are familiar in every community. For example, the children and youth lack positive role models, and there are a lack of meaningful free time activities. Also, the sense of safety is something that we have been discussing a lot, which might be undermined by, for example, bullying and discrimination and also racism. So this has been a very good initiative, and we are going forward with it this year. Just to finish, we really in Vantaa want to see our migrants as active and capable members of our municipality and society as a large. I think working together with migrant background people has really strengthened our cultural understanding, boosted our language skills to really epic scales, and then really enhanced the cooperation with communities. And so it's very important that we continue to do this. Also, I think the municipality is mainly functions mainly as an enabler of information and services, and we really need partners to do this properly. Integration takes place in multiple domains of life, and the city cannot tackle all of these. So we need NGOs, we need sports organizations, we need faith-based communities, and luckily we have a lot of those in Vantaa. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I think we will come back later in the Q&A session about how you're particularly involving also migrants and refugees in your the state administration and the leadership, because I think we have quite a few people there as well. So that's also very interesting to learn. But now we go to a refugee-led organization, Question Media, from Sweden, or even that you act globally. I think whilst you will present this, but I think this is one of those illustrations and examples which really illustrates the intersectionality and diversity at one place. So Miles, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to exchange and share with you this morning. My name is Miles Rutendo Tanira. I'm the co-founder and the co-chair of Question Media. So in my presentation today, I'll focus on three things. The first one is give you a brief of what we do, the work that we are doing. And then I'll go into the existing opportunities and challenges. And then lastly, I'll focus on a few recommendations. Question Media, what is it? It is a non-profit initiative for, with, and by trans refugees and migrants from diverse backgrounds in Sweden. Our why we exist. We seek to amplify the voices, the rights, and the visibility, and to reframe the narratives of trans refugees in Sweden through alternative and creative means of engagement to promote inclusion and empowerment. So our strategic goals are centered around mostly centering an intersectional and decolonial approach in our efforts to promote holistic inclusion. And the three main pillars of our work is to promote the visibility and rights of trans people, especially trans refugees and migrants, and also to promote intersectional and strategic alliances, as well as to promote sustainable, healthy movements of trans refugees organizing on their own. So what we do is focus on 4 core pillars, which I will now go into, which is capacity strengthening, community building, media and documentation, wellness, and sport. In terms of capacity strengthening, we do trainings, information exchanges, peer-to-peer connection. And in terms of promoting community building, we are thinking of community from a holistic perspective, which is the community of trans refugees, community of host societies, but also the broader LGBTQI community. In terms of media and documentation, we have an online platform called Question Magazine, which is a storytelling platform, which is mostly focusing on narratives of trans people in Sweden, migrants, refugees in Europe, in the diaspora, and extending to sub-Saharan Africa. In terms of wellness and sports, we do mostly sporting activities, but also such things like football and creative expression, poetry, dance. So looking at opportunities, I'm going to focus on 4 main areas. The first one is the existence of networks. Networking is very important, but also having a social network as migrants and refugees is something that is very crucial during the settlement process of refugees. So we have the existence of civil society, humanitarian organizations that are really supportive and also supportive allies. And these are avenues for connective action and also collective solidarity. Focusing on resources, our major resource is the availability of our community, which is the trans communities, but also the LGBT communities that are willing to support trans refugees. And we also have strategic allies who are very supportive in certain areas. We have mobilizing structures, which is offline, just having the space to connect and to share and to exchange. And also online, the magazine that I mentioned about. I think we are also able to harness the digital platforms to reach out to our communities, but also to increase the visibility of our issues. And then in terms of collective organizing, the existence of allies is something, as I said, which is very important for us to build the strength in numbers, which is something that is really needed when you are a small organization, also working with further marginalized groups. And we have supportive families and allies, as I said. In terms of political opportunities, Sweden is one of these countries which also has existing legal frameworks that protects the rights of LGBTQI people and refugees. So that is something that is important for us to use in terms of strategic litigation, but also in terms of amplifying our rights and organizing with other strategic organizations. We also have other RLOs that are already existing, and the discussion on settlement process or discussion on human rights, anti-discrimination is something that is already alive in Sweden. So we can also leverage these platforms. So not everything is rosy, of course. So I will go into the barriers. As RLOs and also as particularly groups of further marginalized refugees within the refugee community, we face multiple and intersecting barriers. And I will focus on two main domains, which is the structural and the social. So I'll start with the common challenges in the structural domain, which is mostly issues around systemic discrimination, with being systematically and persistently sidelined from decision-making processes. And the second one is issues around lack of meaningful or intentionality in being inclusive when it comes to refugees and migrants, but particularly further marginalized groups of refugees and migrants. And then the third one is prejudice and stereotype, being perceived as lacking in information or incompetent or being viewed from a suspicious perspective. That also impacts the organizing and the ability to form organizations or to register organizations. And then there's lack of, in terms of information, there's a general lack of information on existing funding opportunities for groups that are RILO-led, refugee-led organizations, that is. And there's limited transparency around where to access these spaces, as well as language barriers. They also hinder access to these spaces. And then in terms of organizing, there's a lack of intersectional approach in organizing by other civil society organizations and other mainstream organizations working on issues of anti-discrimination, for instance. So a lot of the times you find that further marginalized groups are invisibilized or excluded from key decisions. And now I will go into the social issues. So in terms of social issues, there's also the consistent exclusion, but also the prejudice around migrants, but also around LGBTQ and trans groups. So we face a lot of stigma and discrimination, even within the other RILOs or migrant communities, even within the mainstream LGBT communities. If you are trans, if you are black, and if you're migrant or refugee, the barriers that you face are multiple and intersecting. Now I will go into the recommendations. Given all the challenges that I mentioned, the key issues that I would say is the first one is to encourage collaboration, especially with further marginalized refugees and migrants, co-create, see refugees and migrants as people with the agency to represent their issues, involve them, engage them, and also make sure that funding is available and that this funding is distributed from an intersectional perspective, and also really create platforms that are really inclusive and promote equity. And the other thing that I will speak about is to identify groups that are working on these issues and center their voices and their perspectives, especially further marginalized refugee groups. Because when we talk about refugees, we feel excluded. And then from a social perspective is to promote inclusion and to promote equity and diversity. Also just remembering that the true measure of our society is in how we treat the most vulnerable in our midst. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miles. It's really inspiring to hear your activities, and especially, you're mentioning the focus of intersectionality and having triple or even double discrimination, instead of having triple advantage over having the diversity. So, but perhaps we'll go back to this in the Q&A session. Now I would like to give the floor to Akhtar, who is a very active member of the Lithuanian Refugee Council, which is quite active RLO in Lithuania. Yeah.
Good morning. Is it working, right? Yeah, okay. Good morning, everybody. So as Karolis mentioned, my name is Akhtar, and I'm working with the Refugee Council of Lithuania. And the Refugee Council of Lithuania is a refugee-led organization. It means over 50% of the employees and also over 50% of the organization management board members or refugees themselves. At the Refugee Council of Lithuania, we try to empower refugees by fostering connectivity, dialogues, while providing essential supports for social and economic participation. But at the Refugee Council of Lithuania, we believe in 4 important things or concepts, which are co-designing, co-creation, partnership, and joint forces. So it means all our programs and projects for the refugees are somehow co-designed with the refugees themselves. We have connections and channels with different refugee communities, and we have regular and constant meetings with them, and we do research about their needs, problems, challenges, and recommendations. So it means we involve refugees from the very beginning, from the needs analysis or needs assessment for the refugees till end of the project, which is impact measurement. So all refugees are somehow from different communities like Ukrainians, Syrians, Afghans, Tajiks are involved, and they are part of our organization somehow, directly or indirectly. and we invite them to the meetings for the Refugee Council of Lithuania. And co-creation means that at the operation level, we try to co-create with all stakeholders and players in the same field. So it means refugees' needs are not just one or two, but there are needs of many organizations to be involved, including the government, so to respond to the challenges and problems of refugees more effectively and appropriately. And partnerships. Now at the Refugee Council of Lithuania, we believe that not only in Lithuania, we need to create partnership with other successful players in other Baltic states and Nordic states. So to learn from their experiences and to ask their supports for more effective implementation of our projects and programs. And also join forces. It means we know there are many successful organizations and key players at local level and also at the EU level. So we would like to join and to make our forces all together and to put all our initiatives to make it very effective and strong and to strongly respond to the needs of the refugees. So the Refugee Council of Lithuania is focusing now on two very big and major areas. Like the first one is refugee representation or refugee involvement and interactions with the key sources and key institutions and organizations. Why we do it? Because we would like to connect refugees with the right sources and right institutions to voice their problems, to be heard, to be listened. So maybe there are supports for them, but they don't understand. They don't know who is the main in charge for that sources. So we had projects, and we have also projects from UNHCR for the organization to implement such projects to connect the refugees with the institutions and also local communities to create their networks and to share their problems and to voice their problems. And another major and important focus area for the Refugee Council of Lithuania is refugee entrepreneurship. So all, if not all, but the majority of refugees have talent and experience in the field of business. They already had some backgrounds in the business field in their countries of origin. But here, they need some support, some information. And the Refugee Council of Lithuania is trying to build their skills through mentorship, trainings, and consultations and business, creating business networks. So it's a two-way support. It's not only supporting the refugees, but it's supporting the community and the government as well. So it means at micro level, if we think about the benefits of the business and refugee entrepreneurship, it means we are supporting refugees to feed their families, to have incomes. But at macro level, there are many bigger and more important benefits from this initiative. It means there will be a direct contribution of refugees to the country GDP growth or economic growth of the country. So they will have incomes, they will pay more taxes to the government and many good things. And the job creation, now not only refugees need a job, but locals also need a job, a better job. So they like more income. So if they have businesses, it gives the opportunity for locals also to cooperate and to have some, if not a full-time job, but maybe a part-time job to increase their incomes as well. And it also helps the soft power of the country. So and the global image of the country. Refugees from different countries, they have different connections with different business people outside of the, if I mean Lithuania. So it means it gives a better image of Lithuania that somehow inspires in other investors to come and invest. So they think that this is a friendly environment, business environment for refugees, so it can help, so it works. And also it leads to innovation that not only the local products will be available, but more products will come to the market. And so many good things are there. So now we have programs funded by UNHCR and by the US Embassy, and also Nordic Council of Ministers. So, but now the key things we are doing, we are providing trainings and skills development for refugees, and also connections and dialogue and discussions with not only with the other refugee communities, but also with the institutions and the local community. Thank you very much. My time is finished, but
thank you, Akhtar. And now we are moving to the last part, which is, I think, really interesting and inspiring. Still quite a new initiative as part of the Ukrainian situation response. So again, is CEO of the really amazing initiative, which is called Ukraine Hub. And she will talk about how the Ukraine Hub is rebuilding the civil society and also helping to integrate refugees here. So over to you.
Thank you, Karolis, and good morning, everyone. And I really want to thank the organizers for having such a beautiful and diverse panel here today. It's an honor. It's quite difficult to talk last because I think there are several things on my notes that will be repeated. I want to start with two messages, or one of them is rather a premise. Well, I believe that, and we're talking about integration, and I believe that refugees or migrants can only be integrated, whatever that word encompasses: participation, responsibility, learning the language. So I believe refugees can only be integrated when they are out of survival mode. And I think this is a message for policymakers, because from our experience working with Ukrainian community, you cannot expect a person to go and network, socialize, learn the language if the basics are not covered, if the person feels unsafe, if there are issues with financial stability, food, accommodation, and so on. So this is also where Ukraine Hub started, with the premise that we are not a humanitarian organization. There are humanitarian organizations working in Lithuania and covering those basic needs, and we are taking a step further, working actually with integration, even though we don't, it doesn't reflect in our description, so to say. My second message, and it was already highlighted, I think, by most of the panelists here, is that refugees or migrants are not statistical items. They are people. They're people with enormous capacity, with enormous potential, and I think for every organization that works with refugees, we have to start with that premise, that every refugee or migrant or newcomer holds that potential for the host society and for their home society. So with these two premises, I want to start talking about Ukraine Hub, which is an initiative, as you can see from the name, for Ukrainians. And we work with activating, enabling, and connecting active Ukrainians, or those who want to be active. This is an initiative that was started by Open Lithuania Foundation, and we believe in the power of civil society, the power of Lithuanian civil society, but also in the power of Ukrainian civil society, whether they are displaced or on the move in the transitional mode. So we are Vilnius-based, and we are sort of a competence center with a focus on equipping Ukrainians with knowledge, skills, the right network, so that they can grow professionally, become stronger, and contribute to the building of the future of Ukraine, whether they stay here in Lithuania, whether they move somewhere else or return back to Ukraine. This is our basic premise. I don't have many slides, so this is just to give you an idea of what we do and our achievements. We officially opened a year ago, on the 2nd of February, but the work actually started slightly earlier since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. A group of activists, Ukrainian activists, came to Open Lithuania Foundation, and we accommodated them by providing premises, by plugging them into our network of donors, our network of partners, NGOs, and we actually calculated that Open Lithuania Foundation and Ukraine Hub facilitated around 1 million euros for projects initiated by Ukrainian activists here in Lithuania. So this is what we see as our mission, to have more projects by Ukrainians, because we believe in the, as I said, in the power of those individuals and that they can bring the change. So right now we are a membership organization which has over 300 active Ukrainians from all over Lithuania. I would say, apart from facilitating the network to donors, partners, other NGOs, we also stimulate those active Ukrainians who want to do something but don't necessarily know how to do it. We assist them in with trainings, how to go from an idea to a project, and then we also support them with small grants. This is 2,000–3,000 euros, but this has proven to be really, really impactful. We have funded 20 projects right now, and they are all not about supporting family or covering basic needs, but they're all about community. So these are artistic projects, journalistic projects, women's circles, mental health. So it's a huge variety, and with the small amount of money, we can see that we actually can make a huge difference. We also see, and this is what we found out at the beginning of our work, that these are Ukrainians who want to be creative and active, but there's a lack of spaces and networks to do that. So for example, a lot of Ukrainians wanted to network, professional networking, but there was no such space in Lithuania created for them. So we started professional clusters within our community. So we have mental health professionals, cultural professionals, academic youth, and women entrepreneurs. And within those clusters, we also encourage to network with Lithuanian counterparts, and this is also where integration happens. One other thing that I want to highlight is that, and I think this is true for other refugee-led organizations, that we are an immense source of information for policymakers. When policymakers design some sort of policy, do come to us and check whether it's working or not, because we are a trustworthy partner for you to find out whether the policy you designed is effective. There can be many studies, many researches, but sometimes, and I think this was highlighted yesterday, there is lack of trust in the interviewer or lack of trust in the person who asks you a question because he's a representative of the municipality. Whereas our organizations, both, for example, Achtars or Miles or Ukraine Hub, there's a huge trust because it's community-led. So apart from myself, the whole team is Ukrainian, and we get a lot of information on how they feel, what kind of challenges they face. For example, right now there's a huge question of language, and we also commissioned a study to understand how access to language is provided, how access to mental health is provided for Ukrainians. So this is kind of also a message to policymakers: do come and talk to us, because we have loads of information which is experience-based and real information. And yes, so that was my kind of final message, is that we are open for, especially for policymakers, for municipalities to come and talk to us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Evgenia. It's really amazing. Before giving the floor to the audience, I think we should have a lot of questions after these 5 excellent presentations and the really inspiring practices. I have quite a conceptual question perhaps to all of you, and I think it also resonates to what you, Evgenia, just indicated, because to fulfill the concept of co-creation, you need 2 things. So you need to have proactive, intercultural associations, migrant-led organizations, refugee-led organizations, whatever, name it, but it's not enough. That's the point A. The point B, you should have inclusive and open institutions to welcome those organizations. So my question is for Akhtar and Eugenia, because you're from Lithuania. Do we have these open institutions at national and local level already established in Lithuania? For example, as Etno or Vanta city, this multicultural council, or we're still, far away from that? So that would be the first part of the question to you. And, perhaps for Miles, Suvi, and Peter, you are already operating in the more inclusive environments. So from your perspective, what steps should be taken, to create inclusive and open and responsive institutions? Because, in the Nordic ecosystem, we have a lot of refugee and migrant-led organizations already, but what does it take to really create the open institutions that the institutions, by designing the policies, will reach out automatically by default to the intercultural associations without any facilitation or artificial bridging? So perhaps we can start with the Lithuanian part.
You put us right on the spot with that question.
Yes. That's why I have this panel discussion.
Yes. So I had in my notes under the question, what we're missing here in Lithuania, I had coordination and dialogue with government institutions. And I'm really inspired by Vanta example. I think this is brilliant, and this is what we need in Lithuania. There is a lack of coordination, not only, let's say, on the vertical between the municipal or government level with the NGOs, but there's also a lack of coordination between ourselves. Let's say NGOs, we started also working on women entrepreneurship project, and we realized that there are at least 7 or even 8 other organizations working on the topic, and they've never met in one room. So I'll brag. No, under the leadership of Ucreate Hub, we coordinated a meeting of 7 organizations that work with entrepreneurship, including Refugee Council, International Organization for Migration. We invited Innovation Agency of Lithuania to talk about their services, and Ukrainians didn't know that they could actually go to Innovation Agency of Lithuania for certain services and consultations. So I think it just shows that we definitely can do more, and as I said, we are like a brilliant source of information. Come and use it, this source. We can give so much insights into what challenges the community is facing. So I'm really hoping to see something materializing, something as Vanta has in their city. Akhtar.
Thank you very much. It's not only NGOs' responsibilities or organizations' responsibilities to solve refugees' problems, but it's, I think, everybody's problems to support refugees somehow, because they are the most vulnerable part of the community. And in Lithuania, at local level, I think there is a need of more friendly policy for supporting refugee-led organizations and all other organizations supporting and working for refugees. So it means if we divide it by some categories like funders, implementers, and connectors, so it means the government in Lithuania needs to allocate some resources and some supports to the organizations being directly involved in the projects for refugees, and also refugee-led organizations somehow they need more like capacity building and more advocacy to support refugees. And donors also like UNHCR, it's also UNHCR's responsibility somehow to do some advocacy for such organizations working at the local level. And the government, including the parliament, we need really a better coordination and more effective and stronger voice together to voice the problems of refugees, not at local level, but at EU level, and to be connected with other stronger sources to to help us. So it means, as Eugenia mentioned, there is a need of more friendly policies and stronger coordination and collective voice to make it stronger. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. I think this is really relevant. And just to let you know, perhaps that, you know, as we say, in many cases, the coordination, it's not too costly. I think that's also a very important element. So now perhaps going to Vanta and to Etno as an examples, and you know, this is where, you know, I will just repeat myself, you know, is it difficult to create and is it difficult to maintain such you know, structures at the national, regional or the city level? Because, you know, when we say, you know, when we use this concept as co-creation, the dialogue, co-design, it sounds like a rocket science. But mainly it's basically opening the door, picking up the phone and invite migrant organizations for a roundtable. So, you know, preliminary shouldn't be too costly, but perhaps to maintain as a structure, it might take quite a few resources. So what does it take? The political will, the inclusive institutions, what does it take?
To be honest, I think it takes a bit of everything that you just mentioned. In Vanta, we have quite long traditions in this co-creation and working with NGOs. It hasn't really happened overnight, so it's, to be honest, I think it started around 2000 when we had our first larger crisis involving the Finnish people and our refugee community. And to solve that crisis, we needed the help of NGOs, the skills, the language skills, the cultural skills. And I think that was one of the sort of starting points for this cooperation. And I think also from the city perspective, it also needs a sense of humility as in to realize that we can't do it alone. I mean, we can't do everything, we can't solve every issue, and we need to focus on what we do best to provide basic services. But in order to give or create an environment where everyone's welcome and we promote inclusion, we need to have more than just basic services. We need stuff that, you know, supports the everyday life of people who come to Vanta. And language courses are not enough. We need also the sense of community, and maybe the NGOs can provide that for the newcomers. So I think it's multiple things, but it's also important for obviously politicians and city leaders to also take this issue up and feel committed to it and think that it is important that we welcome newcomers and co-create and develop our city for the better.
Yeah, thank you. I actually live in Vanta, but this was not planned. But from the national perspective, I'd maybe go back to the values some of the values that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. I'm going to mention three, and one of them, one of the key values that I think we can all share, and we all share, is the rule of law idea. We all want to build societies based on the rule of law, where laws work, where laws guide, where laws steer policy and processes. So if there is the will at the national government to build a structure that brings in different stakeholders for consultation, for dialogue, then try and build it from a legal perspective. You have a decree or you have a law that gives foundation to that kind of platform. Very important. And one thing that I have realized over the years working in Ethno is over time, it builds a working principle that no policy is good to formulate without consultation. It's a culture that builds over time. You can have it in law, but it's a culture that you have to build over time. No matter what policy we are developing, let us create a culture of consultation, stakeholders, different groups, so on and so forth. The second principle that we all adhere to is transparency. We all want to do things in a transparent way. Nobody wants to do things in hiding. So developing that openness, that sense of trust, working relationships and networks with different stakeholders is very important at the national level, because you need different experts, different know-how on different issues. And then the last one was about the resources. Building a platform like Ethno is not very expensive. We have a working budget of 80,000 every year. And then we have the staff, myself and a colleague, so 2 people at the national level. And then we have colleagues at the regional levels who do it as part of their normal work. So the network or the platform that you want to build depends on how committed you are to the cause of building dialogue and cooperation. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Peter. And just perhaps to illustrate the relevance of the Ethno network is that perhaps you already know that Finland has been undergoing the huge integration revision, new integration legislation, institutional developments. And basically, the Ethno as a platform has been used as a consultative platform to get the feedback on the integration legislation across the country from hundreds of intercultural associations. So it pays off. So as soon as you have the system, it really pays off, because then what you organize, it's basically you can get the feedback in the very structural way, not from the researchers, but right from the experts and from the multicultural associations and refugee organizations.
Yeah, just a short comment, and directly related to Professor Brochemann's presentation. I hope I pronounced that properly. Finland is going through a very interesting phase where we're shifting from the Swedish model and we're headed straight to the Danish model at the moment. So it's a very huge policy shift, but in order for such a change to happen, you need a lot of consultation, and we really hope, despite things being prepared very quickly, that there's going to be a lot of consultation. Rights to citizenship and naturalizations are being made very strict. Language restrictions and requirements are being made very strict. So there's the need to engage with the communities, migrant refugee communities, before laws are passed in parliament. And that's where Ethno and its kind of consultative bodies are important.
Absolutely, thanks a lot. Miles, perhaps now to you. My question perhaps might be a little bit provocative, but we all say that we should celebrate diversity. That diversity is cultural, social, economical enrichment, and we all agree on this. Yeah, we are absolutely all of us on the same page. When one look at the intersectionality concept, and as you mentioned, in the European country, to be a black person, to be a refugee, to be a trans person, LGBT refugee, it doesn't seem that you have a potential of success and benefits. Basically, we are placed in the triple disadvantage sometimes, or potential of triple discrimination. Why it is still happening? And from your experience of your organization, what should be done step by step to really translate intersectionality from a triple disadvantage to at least double advantage?
Thank you for such a deep question. I think, in short, what I can say is look at it at 2 levels still. At a structural level, we are taking space in communities or societies where there is still systemic discrimination, which is embedded in structures, embedded in policies, and it's deeply rooted, right? So it's also mostly about the policies and the structures, having that political will to really reflect on our policies. Are we not leaving some groups behind? And are we intentional about inclusion? When we say inclusion, what do we mean? What does it look like for the communities that we say we want to include? So that means having those communities at the table, and not just about having them at the table, but also making sure that they have opportunity and are well equipped, right, to meaningfully engage. And whatever they say in those spaces is taken seriously and not just as a form of tokenism or ticking boxes that, yes, we had 2 trans people, black people, refugees, we are good to go. But are we taking whatever they say into consideration in reformulating or reflecting our policies and our structures? Because how we are structured also depends on how we distribute funds, how we set up our communities or whatever platforms that are available for people to engage in. So I think that is the first step at the structural level, because the structures also determine the type of services that people will encounter or have experience with in communities or societies. And then at a societal level, it also spills, right? Because at the societal level, a lot of the times, if we have rising far-right groups that are spreading anti-migrant sentiments, racist sentiments, a rising anti-gender movement or feminist movement that is anti-gender, and spreading a lot of trans hate that spills into the communities on the ground. So we might, on the one hand, say we are high on the MyPEX index in terms of labor market access, in terms of access to housing or whatever, but then you need to look at your data as well from an intersectional perspective. What does that look like for the further marginalized communities? When we say migrants are well integrated, whatever that means, who are we talking about? What type of migrant? Who are we looking at? Those that are seen as the deserving ones, able-bodied, maybe white people, maybe cis people, or straight people? Are we also looking at the demographics to say how many of those that successfully integrated are LGBTQ? How many are black people? How many are people living with disabilities? So we need to look at this from a very holistic perspective, as well, even at society level, when we are engaging in our communities, when we're working with women's groups, when we're working with youth groups. What does that look like? Are we really including everyone? And it might sound cliche, but are we not leaving people behind, even in our organizing as humanitarian organizations, civil society, or just as grassroots groups? Yeah,
Thanks a lot for this really strong statement, and I absolutely agree with you. Perhaps we can give the floor now to the audience, and we have at least space for 1 or 2 questions. Over to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Svetlana. I'm a Ukrainian activist and also a Ukrainian refugee here in Lithuania. And I'm also working with inclusion, integration, war trauma, and resilient community building. So I was inspired a lot with your panel, and a lot of questions raised up in my mind, but I will ask only one. I know we have a break. My question is from grassroots level, and I would like to ask, from your personal perspective, as a host country experts or refugee community experts, how do you personally, as a human being in a host country, define the success of integration? How you personally define, if you see the refugee community or refugee itself, in which case, from the holistic perspective that you mentioned, inclusion perspective, how do you personally define that, yes, this is the well-integrated case? But I do not want to hear from the professional background, from your personal experience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this excellent question. So perhaps we can start with Akhtar.
Maybe I can start. So thank you very much for the question. For me, I'm also a refugee. I'm originally from Afghanistan. And I understand what's the problem for a refugee, how refugees are feeling when they left everything behind and they were seeking for protection and support from some other new friends and maybe countries and societies. So for me, a successful integration is when both the community and the refugees feel connectivity and closeness. So refugees to feel that they are part of the society and country and try to contribute. And the locals and the host community also to show support and to try to protect them as much as they can. So the sense or the feelings of belongingness means that both sides, they somehow see each other in one picture, and they see common goals to achieve. And inclusion, as you mentioned, it's very important. It's not always at individual levels, but government's policies need to be more friendly and more inclusive, and they need to pave the way for. I know from my experience in Lithuania, Lithuanians were very friendly and they are very polite people. They want to support as individuals always. I noticed this, but there is the government. It's mainly responsibility of the government to create an opportunity for both the refugees and the local community members to interact and to have discussions and dialogues and to know each other, and all about the integration policies and so on. So thank you very much for me.
Thank you very much. I think that this question deserves at least few PhD theses. It's quite, I know, it's quite a subjective feeling, but it's really a great question. But unfortunately, we run out of time. So perhaps we can, also move with, with this discussion during the coffee break, because I'm sure that Miles would have also some of the answers. If you could reply to this question in 1 minute, would it be possible? What does it mean, subjective, integration success in your own way?
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's really subjective. So I would rather we discuss it later, to be honest. Thanks.
It's okay. So I think we can finalize our discussion once again. Thank you very much for the work you do, and keep up with the good work to further support refugees and migrants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your amazing initiatives you lead and for the experience you shared. So as you heard, we have a coffee break. So let's have 20 minutes for that, and then we'll come back here and continue 10 minutes past 11. Thank you.
so we can kind of like see the notes. More. Yeah. Done is you'll see your PowerPoint there. I think because ours is longer.
So welcome back. We are here at Berkeley Klubas. Welcome back to those who are following this conference online. We'll continue for the second part of today's conference we're in. And as I talked previously, we'll have a time to speak about mental health and how that's also connected with integration process. And I'm really glad to invite here the moderator of this discussion. It's Karila Levitskaite. She's a psychologist, human rights and mental health expert, holding international diploma in this field. And she's also a publicist and educator and human rights advocate. And quite often you can see her on Lithuanian media. So Karila, the floor is yours.
Is it on? Good. Today, I was having one dilemma before entering this floor, how to welcome you, to say good morning or good day, and somebody advised me to say hi, which is a friendly way of greetings, and it was just one dilemma I had. Actually, mental health and well-being and, of course, integration or inclusion, as we say, is nothing about having any dilemma or any, confusion about. Because this topic is absolutely relevant for everyone in this audience, right? Because everyone has mental health. And, of course, mental health is related to all the life experiences. So people in migration, they often face challenges because of access to services, and services are under development in countries, because from transiting from biomedical to biopsychosocial model is still very much topic of concern. And also people are experiencing potential traumas, the rough events. The migration process itself, it also is harming mental health by hindering or by harming human rights. So rights-based approach to mental health is also we have to stand on if we want to refer this issue. And today we will have outstanding experts to share so-called MHPSS model, which is the mental health psychosocial support model we will talk about in this area. And I would like to invite Sofia Casas to present the first piece of our session. Sofia Casas is the Regional Mental Health Psychosocial Support Office from Regional Bureau for Europe, United Nations Refugee Program, and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Yes, you're welcome.
Good morning. It's still morning. Is this working? Yes? Put it closer. Okay, got it. Perfectly. It is such an honor to be here, so thank you for inviting me. My role is, I'm with the UN Refugee Agency as the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Officer, is what we call it, for the Regional Bureau for Europe. And what I've been asked today, I have a very ambitious plan for the next 15 minutes. So I apologize ahead of time to the interpreters because I will be going very quickly, and I'm apologizing now. This is a really important topic, and what I've noticed working in this region over the last couple of years is that it's increasingly being spoken about. And it's quite surprising. I think that COVID put mental health really in the spotlight. And actually, I think the Ukraine refugee crisis in the region really elevated that to another level. And I think that the hope is that that can actually benefit not just Ukrainian refugees, but all refugees, and also the host community, by bringing mental health really more at the forefront of a lot of discussions. So my task today is to present to you what exactly is mental health and psychosocial support. When we say this term, MHPSS, what exactly is this? And I hope that you walk away having some idea of what we think about when we say those terms. And the speakers after me are, I mean, we're very lucky to have here two amazing speakers after me, who I hope are gonna flesh it out even more. So I'm gonna be providing you a bit of a framework. Okay, so this is a beautiful painting, actually, that was recently done in Bulgaria with refugee youth who are Ukrainian and also Kurdish. And I just think it's a really great way to start by looking at this. So just as a snapshot, a global snapshot, very quickly. We have, this is the recent report in October of 2023 of UNHCR numbers. So there's currently 110 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. And 6.1 of these are asylum seekers, 36.4 are refugees, 5.3 are other people in need of international protection, 62.5 million are internally displaced, and out of these, you have 43.4 million are children. So this is increasing, it's not going down, and that's just to give you an idea of, this isn't just an isolated problem. This is quite universal and quite global, and we always need to keep that in mind, and also know that it could potentially just be getting worse and more challenging, right? So I've inserted this slide late last night, after we talked a little bit yesterday about the multi-sector needs assessment that was done in the region. And so I thought just to give a little bit of context here, more specific to Europe, specific to the Ukraine response, because that is the data that we have, specific to Ukrainian refugees. We did this multi-sector needs assessment in the region. And by the way, this does not include the figures from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, because a mental health question wasn't actually asked on that questionnaire, unfortunately, but I hope this year it is. So this includes the other refugee receiving countries in the region. And what was really interesting is that we found 30% of households have at least one person experiencing a mental health problem. And the question that was asked is, you see this question at the bottom, which really is more about functioning. So if someone is responding yes to that question, they really do need mental health support. This isn't more of distress, or this isn't really something that can be resolved, I think, just by very light touch services. But what was interesting is that when we asked those households, do these people in your home need support, only 55% said yes. And that was lower than what we expected. And I think that just to plant the seed of the level of stigma that exists around mental health, that people are still so afraid to really say that they need help, or that even someone in their home needs help, right? So just to always keep that in mind, and MHPSS, it's a beautiful framework for really trying to find solutions to some of these problems that we face globally, universally about mental health, and the stigma affiliated with it. Okay. Really quickly, because we could spend a long time on this, but when we talk about well-being, there's a couple of models that I just want to bring to your attention, which I encourage you all to go into much deeper after this. But the essence of it is this. Well-being, it's very logical. All of you experience this in your lives. Well-being is impacted by many things around us, right? And so I have these two models which I just wanted to, and you were mentioning the biopsychosocial model as well. Here's the social-ecological model, which is as if you imagine we're like an onion, right? There's all these layers around us, and we are influencing everything around us, and the world is influencing us, right? All these different layers, from the individual up to the social, the legal, the institutional, all of that. Our community, our friendships, our family. And then we also have this beautiful psychosocial well-being flower, which comes from, I believe it's Williamson, but I took it from IFRC because they have the best. They use the well-being flower very beautifully. And if you look at this, you have these 7 aspects of well-being, right? Or here there's 6, but really there's 7 well-being aspects. So it's just to say that we are more than just our physical, biological body, right? Or our social environment, or our cognitive experience or state, or emotional or cultural. We really, all of these things, I like to imagine these models help us realize that our sense of well-being is a constant dance between all of these different areas of life, right? And just to keep that in mind, that when we are planning mental health supports and psychosocial support, especially at a community level, we need to be keeping all of this in mind. So the other aspect of this is understanding that we all have risk factors and protective factors. And our work in MHPSS is very much about increasing protective factors, right, in someone's life, and trying to reduce risk factors, and also take into account risk factors. So, for example, a refugee living in a single-headed household where the mother doesn't have a job, that is a risk factor, right? Unemployment is a risk factor. A protective factor might be that that same family belongs to a larger community of support. And so that supportive system is providing some level of protection for them. And so we want to be increasing those protective factors in our work and trying to at least acknowledge the risk factors and reduce them, right? And this goes into a lot of things around intersectionality that Miles was talking about earlier as well, which is really important to always be taking into account. Okay, I'm running out of time. So what exactly then is MHPSS? It's really a term that we've been using it quite a lot. So this is the very, how do I put this, like the really technical definition of what it is. So this is the guidelines where this really comes from. And here is the version from 2007. And I also included the version from Ukraine, because I think that it's being used quite a lot in this region, and it was translated quite impressively, actually. It was really quite an incredible process for translating it. So essentially, when we say MHPSS, what we're saying is that these are a wide range of actions that address social, psychological, and psychiatric problems that might be pre-existing or are emergency-induced, okay? And we like to talk about it being something, these activities are there to protect and promote psychosocial well-being. So kind of what I was saying earlier about these protective factors, but we're really there to protect and promote them. It requires a lot of coordination amongst government, amongst non-government actors, civil society. Coordination is everything in this work around MHPSS, because we cannot, not one organization or body or person can do it all and can cover all of the needs. So we really need to come at it from many different angles. We have the Sphere Handbook. These little things here are to say that in the past around emergencies, mental health really wasn't something that was even talked about. So I don't know if you guys might be a young crowd, but if you remember the Millennium Development Goals, mental health wasn't even mentioned in them. In our Sustainable Development Goals globally, finally well-being has shown up, mental health and well-being, right? So that's just to give you an idea of also, these are still ideas that are being, I think, improved upon and growing. Okay. Obviously, people in emergencies experience a wide range of problems, right? It's really important to remember that resiliency is there. Most people will recover in time, okay? However, there are a group of people who need more support. So I'm gonna, show you a framework of how we kind of approach this in order to understand how to best allocate our resources when it comes to mental health and psychosocial support in an emergency or in a population that has been affected by some type of humanitarian crisis. Okay, so these are our 6 core principles of MHPSS that come from our Interagency Standing Committee guidelines. And I'm gonna focus right now on multi-layered supports. So, can I skip? There we go. One of these principles, I'm going very quickly because I really want to cover this pyramid. One of our principles is about multi-layered supports in MHPSS. And this, if you can walk away today with one thing, let it be this pyramid, because this is the framework from which our planning should really kind of be born from, right? It can really inform quite a lot of what we do. And essentially, you have these 4 layers. And the bottom layer is your social considerations of basic services and security, right? This is what 100% of a population affected by conflict need this, or by emergencies need this. And this is those basic things like food, water, shelter, information, but all of it being done that also honors someone's dignity, right? And then we move to the second layer, which is strengthening community and family support. This is this larger community base. And then we move to the third layer, which is focused psychosocial support. And our last layer is clinical services. And just to keep in mind that this is that the minority of need is done by specialists. Mental health is not something that you just go and you hire. I've seen it too many times. You just hire hundreds of psychologists and you call it a day. It's not actually what's really needed. We need to think about it a bit more out of the box and more creatively. So here's some just quick kind of taking a look at this in terms of numbers, right? 100% of people need basic services and security. 30 to 75% might suffer from severe or moderate distress and could use some type of community activities, yeah? And this is a whole range which I wish I had more time to go into about what these all look like. I might be able to get to a couple slides about it. And then 15 to 20% of people may suffer from mild to moderate mental health needs. And then the very top you see is the minority, right? The very top of that pyramid, you would have 0. So again, just to think about that, as you're thinking about your contexts, where do you put resources? And really those bottom layers about community and supports are just so important, and where we should really be investing. I'm going to skip this, but it's a very helpful diagram to look at. Okay. One of the other things to keep in mind is matching needs with training. So again, this goes back to this idea of the pyramid, that as you move up the pyramid, you need more skills, very clearly, right? The psychiatrist at the very top would have the most skills in terms of mental health. However, it really should be shared across all of society and take a holistic approach. So it could be teachers, it could be social workers, community volunteers, counselors, faith leaders. Mental health is really, in psychosocial support, should really be shared by a whole community and also by peers with each other, right? So obviously as you move up the pyramid, you need more and more training and more skills. But it's a beautiful distribution of responsibility, I think, across all of society, that we really all have a role to play. And there's so many tools out there in order to also build capacity so that this responsibility can really be shared among society. So a community-based MHPSS approach, has kind of these key elements to it, because we really want to emphasize the community element to this, that it's really owned by the community, led by the community, and supported by the community. So, I don't know what just happened. Okay. I'm going to move very quickly because I have such a short period of time left. But I wanted to just show you a couple of examples of some of these things from the pyramid where you have this border crossing. This was Ukraine and Poland, right? You have to think about, what does somebody need in this moment? They need their basic services or security. Here, this is in Romania. This is a shop in Romania that has fake money. But the idea was, if you're providing basic needs and services, people should receive it with dignity, right? So they should be able to go, instead of you could just dump a bunch of used clothes in the middle of a floor and have people pick through it, which I've seen many times in shelters, right? Or you could set up a shop and create a fake currency and let people go shopping and buy what they need. So there's something very empowering about that. So this is just to plant some seeds in your mind of, when we provide mental health and psychosocial support in all of these different layers, it can look very differently, right? And I know I'm running out of time, or I already ran out of time, but I just wanted to share this other example. We could talk about all the different layers in much more detail, but I wanted to share this example this is in Bulgaria, and this is a big mural that was done. And it's a great example, I think, of the layer 2 community and family supports, where this was done with youth from Syria, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, and Ukraine. And it was this huge school that we painted. And this is just and it was with artists, refugee artists from 9 countries in the region, who all came together to do this. And they've all gone back to their countries and are doing more of these projects. So I just think it's a really great way of just exemplifying the community-driven also supports. It's not just always clinical or very, formal or psychological. We have to also think about things a little bit outside the box, which I highly encourage, and I think other speakers will be talking more about this as well. And that's my time. But I could talk way more. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Sophia, can you join me here? Yes, yes. So we'll build a row of people in mental health and well-being here for actually further discussion, which will follow up after we will finish with all the presentations. And I really encourage you to keep in mind questions which may be addressed to Sophia for this session, which we'll still have after all the presentations. And I'm very glad you really made an emphasis on this community level, which is absolutely important, and bringing this mental health service as a service among us, right? And I remember when I was volunteering at the Refugee Reception Center in Lithuania, and what I was doing, I didn't use any professional skills. I was just a human being responding to the people around, right? Because the response has to be person-centered, not like professional, but person-centered, which is essential, center of the community support. And of course, the person-centered approach should be really lead us through all the pyramid. And next, really would like to follow up on that and with the examples and with sharing experiences. And would like to invite Antti Clementila, psychologist and psychotherapist, so colleague of mine, who is the development manager at the Migration and Cultural Diversity team at Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare in Finland. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, as I call with hello. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm from the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, THL in Finnish. It's an independent government organization which focuses on health research and health development. Around 1,200 people work there, but in our migration and cultural diversity team, there's usually around 20 people. So it's interesting how we all kind of know that mental health is a factor in integration. How we all know how moving to another country is a stressful event. It takes psychological resources. And still all the governments and municipalities, they put millions and millions in language learning, finding employment. And mental health is sort of like an afterthought, if it's thought about at all. And my point here is to say to you that mental health is actually really important. Focus on mental health. There's no integration without mental health. There's no language learning without mental health, or at least it gets more difficult. There's no employment without mental health. There's no tax-paying money without mental health. So there's an obvious connection with the integration. Better the well-being, easier the integration. And better the integration, usually supports the mental health, because with the integration you get the social inclusion, you get the human agency, you get a lot of good stuff that supports mental health. We have several migration population studies in Finland. At the moment we have had 6 of them. And here's an old one, but it's here to make a point. And the point is that obviously some populations, there are more mental health challenges, more mental health burden. I don't like to talk about diagnostic language, I like to talk about challenges and burdens. But not all. As you can see here with Somali men, some of the populations have less mental health challenges. So research the people you are working with. See what the situation is now. The situation can change every year. There can be developments in our home countries that affects the mental health. Also research how the services are doing. We can see from our research that the mental health services in Finland are not actually connecting with people from migrant backgrounds or foreign origin. If people with migrant background find their way to mental health services, they spend there less time or they drop out altogether. But they are using the services less than the general population. Even though there should be maybe more mental health burden, there should be maybe more need for mental health services, especially with the population with a refugee background. Well, our response to this disparity, this mental health burden and the services doing quite badly was a series of projects. We started with the first project called Paloma, and we took together more than 100 people working with refugee mental health, and these people co-created together a handbook for helping with refugee mental health in Finland. And that was really important project in many ways, like all the experts who took part were actually really happy to be part of creating this and be listened, and that was our first sort of big co-creation project that I was part. And we did a training course as well about mental health of refugees in Finland. And now we left with the Paloma Center of Expertise, this loosely connected network of sort of training and supporting and all kinds of different NGOs, government organizations, municipalities who work with refugee mental health. So second or third of, I don't know how many points I've already made, but get your people together, get the people together who work with refugees, get the people together who work with refugee mental health or migrant mental health, and let them find out what they need, support each other's network, co-create together. I have actually fallen in love with co-creation. It's so kind of easy when you don't have to know yourself everything. You can always go and ask. Our motto is nowadays this very common, nothing about us without us. So every time we go to any kind of minority, we try to include people and we try to get them to work with us to co-create the stuff. And it's easy to say that when you co-create something, the produced value is more than the sum of its parts. And I thought that's just like marketing speak. But when I was in one of the co-creation process, I actually realized what it means. It actually means that when you have different skills and different experiences and you hear them all the time, your own experience gets richer, your own knowledge about the facts gets richer. And you marry that with theories and research and you use co-development techniques, you can do amazing stuff together. For example, we did this psychoeducative video series with refugees and people who work with refugee mental health. We have more than 100 people there again, working to us through workshops to go through what should be on the videos. We had 35 people with refugee background on the videos, and then we have 150 quota refugees with us to pilot the videos. And you might have a look at them. They are dubbed in English, Ukrainian, and Russian as well in www.dhl.fi/mtm. But as an experience, it was really nice to get to know people, get to them include, and we actually researched the co-creation process as well to see how we were going. And some of the people who took part were saying that it was really important. Even the experts who've been working with refugee mental health for 25 years were saying that it really gave me a new insight. It was eye-opening about for my work, and stuff like that. Of course, there's negative stuff, negative comments as well. It's very hard to do some kind of like real co-creation with minorities, because you are supposed to give people actual power to affect and take the direction to go. But with the funds, for example, or with, in this case, because we were making videos, we have to know sort of what we're doing before we started the process. So keep the processes open in the case that some of the knowledge will actually direct it towards something else, something new, something better. So psychoeducation is really, really important. It's a horrible sounding word, but it just means that giving people information, knowledge, and means to support their mental health. And there is like a lot of mental health stigma, like was said, that we're supposed to decrease. And we get this stigma decreased by giving people knowledge about mental health. It's, like previous presenter said, the mental health is really multidimensional fact. I've been learning about mental health 20 years. I'm still learning and evolving the concepts of what all kind of dimensions there are. But somehow in many cultures, mental health is a negative word. It equals about madness or mental health problems or mental health illness or bad stuff. And in my mind, it's actually a positive resource. Mental health is a very positive thing. It's something that we all have. It's something we all should take care of. So give people knowledge. Use everyday language. Please do not label people traumatic or depressive or suffering from anxiety disorder or whatever. You know, it might be easier for you that you understand it through your own like framework what's happening there. But it's still like labeling people. It's not very beneficial unless immediately you offer the way out. You know, now you might have this, but we can do this, and you get better. And according to research, community-based, group-based, any kind of peer-supported psychoeducation is actually better. Get the people talk about mental health, what this means to you. And through the talking about mental health, usually the stigma decreases. Well, there's a lot of research about how the nature is good for your mental health. It's good for your physical health, it's good for your mental health. And for example, in Japan, there's this concept of Shinrin-yoku, forest baths. And they did research in Japan that 15 minutes of sitting in a forest doing nothing actually decreased the stress hormone cortisol 12%. 15 minutes of walking in the forest decreased the stress hormone 16%. So we have a sort of free medicine for stress. At least in Finland, we still got some nature left. It's, you know, you laugh, but it's you know, they're cutting down a lot of trees, 120 million a year. Yeah. So obviously in the Nordic countries, people have been very interested about nature-based integration. We have these every man's rights. Everybody have the right to go camping everywhere, pick mushrooms, pick berries, go fishing. They have them in Sweden and Norway as well, I know. But people who come from different places, the nature is not the same kind of place it's for a Finnish person. Nature can be something scary, something to be afraid of. Nature can have landmines, evil people, all kind of stuff. Or people don't know that they can actually go to the forest. And through going to the surrounding environment, getting to know the environment, people increase the feeling of safety. People increase the feeling of control. You know, I can go there. I can go around, and it starts to feel home in a way. In one project, we searched for we researched about the reasons migrants were going to the forest, and we find out that they had actually more social reasons to go to the forest, where a lot of Finnish-speaking people were actually going there alone. Migrants were going there together, having a picnic and so forth. So it's not, mental health promotion is not very difficult. It can be very basic. I was involved in one project where we have just organized nature walks in reception centers. We organized art groups in reception centers. We organized relaxation groups in reception centers. Very basic level stuff when you look at it from the psychotherapist point of view, but so important because the mental well-being is built in everyday life. It's built on an individual level, on a community level, and on a social structural level, where there you can see the social and health services, but like we were talking this morning, the sense of community belonging, social inclusion, human agency, being able to take part in a common good is so important for mental health as well. And when you co-create something with people, they already get the social inclusion from there. They already get to taking part of the common good from there. So actually co-creation is already a sort of mental health intervention of making mental health better. And then there's the individual level where we should give people knowledge and skills to actually take good care of their own mental health and promote it in a way one would promote the physical health as well. Yes, sorry about the interpreters as well, going quite fast. But if you're interested, have a look in our website. There are a lot of stuff in English. www.thl.fi/monet is the sort there. There's some training programs, all kind of stuff, all kind of information about immigrant health and mental health as well. And this is just to show that it's not always just cold and miserable in Finland. We do have a summer as well. This is a photo I took of a refugee family in one of the summers enjoying nature in Finland. So thank you all for doing extremely valuable work and meaningful work. And if you have some comments or points, you can always send me an email. Thank you.
Finally, on the word medication here, of course, in the like another meeting, like picking mushrooms and berries, not like about brand medicine, which you used to name as a medicine. And I really appreciate your fallen in love with the co-creation method, which absolutely is important. I also work and have a part in Mental Health Europe, the umbrella organization, a European network, which puts this method in the first line to include, right, to bring all the voices. And especially in this very much stigmatized area, in the, I would say, intersection of different stigmas and being in discrimination or target, it empowers people so much. And empowering is also the way of supporting mental health, right? So it's everything in this social perspective is very important, which sometimes in the policy we miss. Sometimes we overlook that with the very rough and also important methods, right? So, and following up, being really fast today with all these topics, I would like to invite the next expert to share experiences. It's Sarah Harrison, head of Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Technical Unit at International Federation of Red Cross Reference Center for Psychosocial Support in Denmark.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Sorry, thank you. It's a very long place title. I apologize for that. Thank you for the invitation for me to speak today. It's always a big responsibility to be the last speaker in a conference, and an honor. And it's also my first time in Vilnius in Lithuania. So I'm actually much more familiar with Nordic countries than I am with the Baltic states. But I am based in Denmark at an international or a global center for the International Federation of Red Cross, Red Crescent Societies. And we are actually responsible for supporting every national society around the world. There's 191, so one in every country. And then within this region, it would mean supporting Lithuania Red Cross, Estonia Red Cross, Latvia Red Cross, etc. And the same for Sweden and Finland. And the other countries in the Nordic region as well. So I am based in Denmark, but I am not Danish. I'm just putting that caveat out there. And I also work globally as well, so not specifically or not only on this region. And today, actually, I only have one main slide. And then I'm actually going to tell you a story to help explain what mental health and psychosocial support services are in practice. Because I think it's still a term that needs demystifying. People are still confused, understandably, on what does it actually mean when someone says they have mental health or psychosocial needs. What's the particular response? What's the support that they're actually asking for? And it comes in a variety of different approaches and styles and formats, which Sophia and Antti have also explained before me. But I think the easiest way for me to to go into detail with it is actually to talk to you from a story perspective. Yes. So this is actually the only slide, so it's a slide full of photos, which makes it easier for you. So the story is that Oksana, who is a Ukrainian lady, she fled Ukraine with the exacerbation of the conflict 2 years ago, and she arrived in Europe with 2 children, her son, Dmitry, who was of teenage years, and her youngest child that was her daughter, called Anna. And she also fled with her mother, and the grandmother of her children, called Yulia. Yulia has dementia, and she could not be left alone in Ukraine. So she has fled with the family. But Oksana was married, and she also had brothers, and she also had uncles. And those people are still in Ukraine now. So some of them have been conscripted, and some of them are staying and have had to work in Ukraine and have not had the permits to leave. So that means that there is automatically a family separation issue before Oksana's even come and registered in Vilnius or in one of the other countries in the Baltic or the Nordic region. And when she's met at the border, and you saw from Sophia's presentation in Poland, the border point, you are wanting to train up your frontline border force, whether that's your police officers, whether it's your Red Cross volunteers, UNHCR, your refugee councils in your country, your civil protection agencies. You're wanting to train them up in basic communication skills, so to be able to calm a person in distress, to be able to actively listen to that person, and to be able to direct that person to further resources based on their needs. So if that person needs to register in that country, directing them to the desk where they can do the registration. If they need emergency accommodation, finding that emergency accommodation desk. And that skill set is something that we call psychological first aid. And it bounces off a skill set that many of you will be familiar with, which is first aid, where you can train up any member of the population to be able to provide first aid to another member of the population. After a road traffic accident, if it's someone falling off their bicycle or your child's injured at home, you have the basic skills to provide first aid. And psychological first aid is run on exactly the same principles. Anybody can be trained up to do it, and it's a basic humane response to enable you to interact with a person in distress. And that person in distress can have had horrendous past experiences, fleeing a conflict in Ukraine, or can be someone that's fled in advance of something. It could also be a natural disaster like a big flood, or even a house fire as well. So you're wanting to train up people on something called psychological first aid, and this is your first port of call. Anybody working at borders, anybody at bus stations or train stations who are receiving refugees, and you're doing your reception, basically, to make that reception as positive experience as possible. Because for many, many migrants and refugees, they have not had a humane, responsive, communicative person that will listen to them. Some migration groups have had a particularly difficult and abusive and discriminatory migratory journey to get to the point where they're then seeking asylum or they're seeking refuge. And the more humane you can make it, the more welcoming that person will feel, and the more positive that person will feel about being able to contribute to the society where they've ended up and the wish to make it their home. So in Oksana's case, when she arrives in a new country, she also then has to decide, is her oldest child, Dmitry, going to continue with education in Ukraine online, which is a policy from the Ukrainian government for the past 2 years. They've just recently changed that policy so that now the decision is Ukrainian children in Europe need to either go back to learn in Ukraine, in Ukrainian schools, there's no more online teaching, or you register your child in the mainstream schooling in the country where you've sought asylum or temporary protection status. So she needs to decide for Dmitry, is he going to continue with the schooling in Ukraine, or is he going to register in the home country? The host country, sorry. And her youngest daughter needs to be enrolled in school, in primary school, in the country. But how do you do this when you don't understand the education system? And the education systems are not aligned between Ukraine and some parts of Europe. There's a year difference. So your syllabus is different. And children are enormously resourceful, they're enormously adaptive, so they can slot quite easily into schooling, but it means that the teachers in those schools need to have an awareness of what it means to receive refugee children within a classroom context. And some children have never had exposure to having a refugee child in their classroom. Despite this being a region that's had a great responsibility and burden sharing for hosting refugees. So there's a responsibility to equip teachers and give them an orientation on what it means to receive a refugee child in that classroom. How can we welcome them? How can we address issues of discrimination and stigma? How can we accept the fact that that child might not learn as quickly? They might be learning in their third or fourth language, and that child is also potentially burdened by the incidents or the events that happened that caused them to flee. So they might be delayed on their homework. Their handwriting might not be perfect. They might not remember the math sums, and that's because their head is busy, it's elsewhere. So there might be a delay in educational development as well. And for the older child, for Dimitri, and we saw this a lot, not necessarily in this region, but in other countries in Europe around the border with Ukraine that were hosting Ukrainians. If Dimitri chose to stay in school in Ukraine, online, it meant that they were very isolated. It was very difficult to access the adolescent population because they were at home on their laptops or their tablets or their phones trying to follow the school curriculum in Ukraine online. But that meant that they weren't going to school. They weren't interacting in the community, in the country where they were living. They were interacting online with their peers, potentially, but it's a very online community. And that meant that they didn't have access to the informal chats that you get in the school breaks. They couldn't make ad hoc friends in the new countries where they were living. And they also struggled to sit things like examinations because it relied upon a reliable internet connection, which was not the case in every country, and certainly not the case if you were living in a collective shelter arrangement. So Dimitri can stay connected to his friends online, virtually, which many adolescents and young people have in Ukraine, but it's not giving them the complete picture. It's not giving them the holistic, healthy development that community-based activities, a school-based environment, does give them as well. And for Oksana, she also has a mother that she's caring for. So she is a single-headed household. Her husband, her brothers, her uncles are back in Ukraine. She's not entirely sure what's happening with them. Some of them might have been injured in the fighting, some of them might also be missing, and she has to make responsibilities for that family by herself. She doesn't have a husband that she can necessarily talk to decide what's going to happen with the children or to work out how best to support her mother. And if you are a person coming from Ukraine with a chronic condition, in this case, Yulia has dementia. It's a pre-existing condition, as Sophia mentioned in her presentation. This is a condition that requires medication and requires ongoing support. So this person needs to see a neuropsychiatrist in the country where they're residing, and they need to have access to their medication and all the social support services that would be in place for a person with dementia. And it's the same thing if it was a person arriving here with a disability that had additional care needs as well. Those need to continue even if the person is displaced and in the new country where they're choosing to stay, the host country, which means there needs to be some form of a social care assessment and a health assessment. And that's happening in a language that's not necessarily the language of Yulia. She might be speaking or might know Russian, particularly if they've come from the eastern part of Ukraine and she's from an older generation. So if you're in a country where some people might still understand Russian, then she has an advantage. But if she's arrived in a refugee country where Russian is not spoken and never has been, then you're going to need to get a translator or an interpreter and to be able to sensitively work with a person with dementia that's affecting her functioning level. So the mental health needs are not just about post-traumatic stress incidences. They're not just about acute anxiety or acute depression as a result of the crisis. There's a lot of people with pre-existing conditions that need their continuous care and support as well. And for Oksana, as a mother and as a carer, she also has to get an income, a livelihood, and also to be connected within the country where she's choosing to live. And the best way to be connected is, as Sophia and Antti presented, is through community organizations, community groups, cultural events. We heard about some of them from the previous panel. with Ucreate, for example, and the examples from Finland as well. So any space where refugees feel safe, feel a sense of ownership, feel that they are able to participate, mean that they will automatically come together and you will get peer support happening naturally. You will get one Ukrainian supporting another Ukrainian and helping them navigate a system jointly together. Or you will get a Ukrainian and a Lithuanian or a Latvian coming together to work out ways to mutually support each other and to guide somebody through the system in the host country where they're being received. And what you need to provide is actually the space and the sense of safety and the ability for people to feel that they can participate. They're very much the co-creation that Antti was talking about in the presentation before. And if you can create that space, those community areas, then they will be filled. And they'll be filled with minimal interference, to use that strong word, from local authorities or from government. Grassroots organizations will fill those spaces and will be able to meet a lot of the needs that Oksana and her family are presenting with, particularly when it comes to addressing isolation issues, sense of belonging issues, but also how to navigate these social care systems and the education systems. And for Oksana herself, she will also need a job because it's impossible for her family, her male family members back in Ukraine, to be able to send remittances to the country where she's living, partly because they've got their own needs in Ukraine, and she feels a responsibility to also be able to send money back to them. She's in a sense of safety, she's fled, so she should be supporting her family members back home. And that means that she also needs to be able to find a job. And there's a huge amount of anxiety anyway for someone that's unemployed finding a job, whether you're a refugee or not. But for a refugee, you also need to be able to doubly market your skills and market yourself. One, your papers have to be accepted, they have to be accredited. So if you are a social worker or a teacher or an engineer or a bus driver back in Ukraine, are your qualifications recognized in the country where you're choosing to seek asylum? And that's not automatically the case. And if you are able to get a job, then it means that you're able to provide for your family. You have a greater sense of control over your own life, over the decisions that will affect your children. You're also able to support family back in Ukraine financially as well. And that gives you a sense of meaning and a self-worth in life again. You're not just a passive recipient of aid, you're also someone that's contributing as well. But in order for Oksana to do that, she needs someone to accompany her through the system. So we heard about it this morning from some of the grassroots groups where you had these networking events or job skill sharing events where you had Ukrainians supporting other Ukrainians, but also professionals from the host country supporting Ukrainian refugees to get their qualifications accredited and recognized so they can then become part of the productive workforce, but also, crucially, because it helps a person's mental health and well-being as well. So it's not just a responsibility of the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Social Services in the country. The mental health and well-being of any refugee and migrant is cross-ministerial, and it's also working on different levels vertically as well. So it includes the community-based, the peer support mechanisms, and it includes right the way up to the formal services in a healthcare system, such as Julia, who will require formal mental health care because she's got a diagnosis of dementia, for example. And that's it.
Perfect timing, and all of the experts, by all the experts' contribution to our session too. But thank you, Sarah, through bringing us through the very clear, the concrete case, right? And there's multiple angles to address mental health and psychosocial support and its importance in this, every case, but in this particular case, right? And it really allows us maybe to touch upon and to see in which areas it's important support, even we don't think about it very, very clearly, right? And I know we are beyond the agenda, but we started later, so we have to take the our time from that gap to the discussion. And actually, I know that foreign, the next phase, like next 2 years, is also having one of the priorities, this mental health and well-being and integration. So bridging to that, I encourage you to use the best knowledge and experience by the experts who are present here, and I invite you to ask questions, and maybe somebody will help me with the mic. Yeah, who would like to ask something or to say something, maybe to comment? Yes, Karolis, I know you by name. So who is going to, I can bring the mic. I can bring the mic, yeah? I have two.
Thanks a lot for this excellent presentations and, going through all this really precise cases that put the real relevance on the MHPSS response. My question is how you would see the MHPSS response in the context of the whole integration package. Because, what we have been observing is, with the increased arrivals from Ukraine in quite a few countries, and I think you are very aware about that, is that there is a lack of individual vulnerability assessment. And then perhaps, we can kind of a little bit ignore or skip the mental health issue in the whole package of integration. And at the same time, quite a few countries, they are working on this so-called fast-track labor market inclusion, which in the context of the lack of vulnerability assessment might increase the potential of the PTSD in the longer run when people will start moving into the labor market and they will drop out for 5 or 7 years after the PTSD will kick in, especially because of the lack of vulnerability assessment. How do you see those two things, the MHPSS response and the fast-track labor market inclusion, as the whole package of integration? Whether this is the challenging, or are there any ways around it to address this? Thanks. So it's perhaps a question for all of you. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah? Oh my, I have a lot. If you think about the pyramid, there's so much I didn't say about the pyramid, but if you think about the pyramid, what you're specifying is a minority of people at the very top, right? And in those case-by-cases, I would say that we don't necessarily need to make sweeping statements because it is a minority. It's a minority of people who might be affected, right? Who might be having PTSD and entering into the labor market. So I don't know if other people have answers to that question, but I actually wanted to take the opportunity to actually emphasize the need to include, there's these fast tracks, and those need to include mental health professionals. It needs to include Ukrainian psychologists. It needs to include counselors, psychiatrists as well. And some countries are on the path to doing that much easier than others because of internal regulations, which are understandable, right? We all have. And I think that we were talking about it last night, I think a bit with some people, but what's interesting about integration and Ukraine specifically, and mental health professionals from Ukraine, is mental health, I would say, like registration is not necessarily very regulated in Ukraine at the moment. There is a path to that the government is taking, and especially the First Lady. And they have created a mental health and psychosocial support national roadmap, which I've never seen before in the world, where there's even a council of all the ministries. There's a representative from Ministry of Defense to Ministry of Labor to Ministry of Education to Ministry of Social Affairs. Everyone is sitting in this ministry talking about this council talking about mental health. And in this roadmap, they very much have specified what is the skill base that we want psychologists and providers to have in the communities. And I think what's really interesting about this is that it's specified. I didn't get to go to that third layer of the pyramid, which we usually call focused non-specialized supports. And Europe, it's turned it on its head, and I just say focused psychosocial support, because you have psychologists providing that third layer. But it's psychologists that are also not used to working in short term. They're maybe used to working in very long term. They might be a psychoanalyst or something. And so we talked about this yesterday, about the dual short-term and long-term response. So all of this is a very long-winded way of saying that one of the things that I think was unique about the Ukraine response, which I very much encourage people to look into, is to look at the national roadmap in Ukraine for mental health and psychosocial support. Look at those skill bases that are being, or those approaches, and there's many different types of approaches, problem management plus, interpersonal therapy, CETA, which is common elements treatment approach. These are what we call scalable interventions. They're short-term for that more kind of, that third layer where people actually are presenting with mental health problems. And maybe people here, when you have a refugee and they might be going back to reintegrate to Ukraine, thinking about what type of skills could we start to incorporate here for people, knowing that they might return back to their country and be able to quickly slip into the regulation that's now taking place there. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think it's just important to kind of think about the majority of people are in need of support on the lower part of the pyramid. Not necessarily that top, right? But to think about integration of professionals, also keeping in mind reintegration. Yeah?
Well, I know the question was about MHPSS, and I'll give you the mic for you in a second, but I just want to say one point is that mental health stigma and self-stigma about mental health is there to sort of some people don't want help. Some people want to be seen as doing all right, especially if their relatives are, when the crisis or like a war is going on. And that's when you do assessments as well. It's sort of, you don't actually get the real picture. You don't get the truthful picture when there's a mental health stigma and self-stigma involved. People just want to play down their symptoms and problems and say, well, I'm just doing all right, don't worry about me. Which, with the pyramid, then just, maybe these people would have needed support, but they're not getting it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say that if a person is functioning and they're able to carry out their daily needs and care for their family, then the diagnosis is less important, actually. And what Antti was saying, if a person needs to want to receive help as well. In Sweden, when they received a large number of refugees from Yugoslavia, when it was breaking up, it took almost 20 years for people that had fled Yugoslavia, come to Sweden, to actually seek mental health assistance. And these were people that had also been tortured, so had had a severe exposure to terror or to trauma, and it took 20 years for them to start appearing at the torture treatment centres that are run, there's 8 of them across Sweden. And that was because it wasn't until their children had been registered in school, that they had passed through school, that they had got jobs, that they actually felt that they belong in Sweden, they had their needs met, that they were then able to have the courage to seek treatment. But it took 20 years. So we saw a spike 20 years after the conflict of people seeking assistance. And these were people that had quite strong mental health needs. But that's when they reached out. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years we also see that small percentage that Sophia was mentioning begin to start reaching out to help as well.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or reflections or comment? I can't see that. Yeah, okay. Can I pass you the mic, please? Yes, there is the mic. Okay.
Hello. Thank you for your contributions. I also am from mental health and psychosocial support field. And I was wondering, so in MHPSS framework, we always emphasize risk factors and protective factors and their interaction, right? So some risk factors for people on the move or refugees especially cannot be avoided, like exposure to violence, uncertainty, or loss of certain social contacts, right? But what are the risk factors that can be avoided? Maybe I would like to hear on that, the risk factors that could be avoided regardless of these difficult circumstances when moving to new place, and what are the resources that are still available regardless of these difficult circumstances when being on the move. Thanks.
Thank you. So, I don't know, Sarah, Antti, Sophia, who would like to take that?
So if I understood the question correctly, it was on risk factors. What are some of the risk factors? Is that correct?
or that can be prevented. That's why you asked me to take the question. Now I understand. I think it's for refugees. I don't know if you can. One thing is the discourse that's coming out from the country. So from the government, but also from society, in terms of how welcoming they are towards receiving refugees. And that means refugees from any particular group, including minority groups. And that goes a long way to combating the stigma and discrimination against refugee groups that then ends up permeating throughout the rest of society. So a welcoming discourse from government, but also from people, TV presenters, from cultural figures, from faith community as well, would prevent the feeling of isolation, the feeling of resentment that might come from when you arrive in your host country and you're not well received. You're regarded as the other, as someone that's a burden on the country rather than someone that's actually bringing skills and wishing to contribute. So I would say one big thing starts from the public discourse, and that starts from leadership in whatever position that leader is, a politician, a faith-based person, an activist as well, having that positive discourse about refugees and migrants coming to the country.
Would like anybody? Yeah. Sarah.
Yeah, I just, what came to mind immediately was actually thinking about, again, intersectionality. And as Sarah's saying, it starts with the host community very much of what also we are willing to talk about in our own society, in our own community, in our own culture. So, I just want to bring it, just highlight that, very frankly, a white refugee arriving in a country that's predominantly white will experience and have potentially less of a risk factor than a black trans woman from Uganda, right? And so just to keep that in mind, that really starts to increase those risk factors. And so we, host communities have to do the work in their own countries as well, right? Which is very much, I think, what Sarah's, alluding to.
Just one point that when it comes to mental health, usually active is better than passive. And we have had integration programs in Finland where there's people have nothing to do. They have a course that finishes, language course that finishes, next course starts at 6 months' time. So they got 6 months of passive time, being home, doing nothing, and that's not very good for mental health. That's not good for integration or feeling socially included or anything. So please keep that in mind when you consider the integration programs.
Okay, we have room for one articulate question. We don't have. No, we don't. Okay, some forbidden for that. So then, if we don't, I want to reflect on that just in a few words. That this topic is not exhausting. And it needs to be followed up in all the frameworks, in projects, in discussions, in public discourse, as you have mentioned. And I wish you all the best luck with, going with that topic and with, your very beautiful network. And being happy today and very pleased to hear all of you, Sarah, Sofia, Antti. Thank you very much, and that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this amazing discussion and for your presentations. By the way, after the conference, we'll have lunch break, so all the questions might be asked during the lunch break as well. But before saying goodbye, I would like to invite here Helen Nilsson. She's a director at Nordic Council of Ministers office in Lithuania, to say some words.
I will not keep you so long, so the lunch is soon with you, and you can continue also to ask questions to our experts. But dear experts, dear participants, colleagues and friends, thank you for being with us here at the final conference of Foreign. Almost exactly 2 years ago, we started to implement our Foreign project. And I also remember we unfortunately needed to change our focus of the kick-off conference due to the start of the war in Ukraine. We wanted to have and implement the project as relevant as possible, referring to the new situation in our region. So we, so to say, throw our developed agenda in the bin and start it all over again. And I also remembered that we started with relevance as a focus. And for those who attended the kickoff here in Vilnius, maybe also remember that you had two hosts. One Lithuanian taking care of my home city, Stockholm, and a Swede taking care of Karolis' hometown in Vilnius. So thank you for the journey, Karolis, and please watch my city a little bit, one more year at least. Throughout the 2 years implementation, we have had, for example, organized 2 study visits, 5 country-specific workshops, 3 feasibility studies, 1 training in Riga, 6 trainings in municipalities or with municipalities. That also led to 2 Nordic-Baltic Twin Cities initiatives. We have had 3 focus groups, 3 international conferences plus this one. In total, actually 27 activities, small, big, with participants per all activities about 6,000 people or persons. We hope you have enjoyed attending our conference today, and for some of you also other project activities as much as we have enjoyed putting it together with our partners. We have come a long way since the last time we were here in Vilnius 2 years ago. But how will we continue this journey to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world? The Nordic Council of Ministers offices in the Baltic states, in Riga, in Tallinn and in Vilnius, has been asked by our headquarters, Nordic Council of Ministers, to develop 4in 2.0. And if we can do that in a good way, I don't say it's signed yet, NCM will fund a new project or be the co-funder of a new project, but of course, we more than welcome also other potential donors to also support these initiatives if possible. Allow me also to mention right now 2 open calls in the field of integration that we have. One, if you're a researcher, you should really listen now. Nordforsk, our institution focusing on research, with partners have a Nordic-Baltic call for research projects on migration and integration, and the deadline is 14th of May this year, and quite a lot of money is available, more than 60,000 million Norwegian crowns. Also, our beloved Nordic Welfare Center has opened a funding pool for projects on the integration of refugees and migrants in the Nordic region, but also Baltic can be part of it, and the call closed mid-June 2024. So if you need more information, you just call me or my colleagues. I again would like to express my sincere thanks to our core project implementation partners, the Nordic Council of Ministers office in Estonia, Latvia. You know who you are, and you are actually also here. My colleagues, but also the Lithuanian Ministry of Social Security and Labor. Thank you really, really much for your cooperation. UNHCR, the regional office in Stockholm, team of diversity development group, of course, in Lithuania, as well as Tartu University, Ministry of Culture in Estonia, Providus, as well as Society Integration Foundation. We would like to claim that 4in has become a brand of key capacity tools when it comes to integration of migrants and refugees in our region. Personally, I also would like to claim that we need to identify regional, national, local structure and system to in the best way integrate migrants to a new society, and to see a potential in having in mind the diversity as a good base for development, but of course also refer to the human rights in general. I also would like to claim that we citizens of our region have a lot of responsibility. I think you know what I mean. We should use our brains for sure, but we should also listen to our hearts. To in short, build trust and resilience and aiming to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. We foresee to develop and in the near future implement a Foreign 2.0. So be ready, we will soon be back again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And yeah, just in the end, to be very, very quick, since everybody is also hungry as I am, I just wanted to say that I'm so happy that I've been here for these 2 days, because me as a journalist, I've learned a lot, what I can use in my daily life, what can I use in my professional life. So I hope you also had an amazing time here. It was really nice to hear all the discussions, also presentations. So once again, a huge thanks from me also to the organizers, but also for the amazing stage decor, which was still not mentioned. So it's thanks to Isku Balde and also Ceramic Studio Rutrut. So Darius Matas says goodbye to you, and I hope you had an amazing time and, well, have an amazing lunch as well. So thank you.